Welcome to the world of scary stories. Here you'll learn about Spanish scary stories in English. You can also choose the story you want from the descriptions using timestamps and titles. Subscribe, like, and share your creepiest stories in the comments. I look forward to seeing you all. Get your ears ready. Get comfortable, turn off the lights, and let yourself be immersed in what awaits you. These are Spanish scary bedtime stories. Let's begin. First story. Woman in the elevator. Hello everyone. This happened to me a few months ago when I was looking for an apartment in the city center. To be honest, I was already desperate because everything was so expensive. And then I found something that looked really good. The photos, recently renovated, spacious, and a price that seemed too good to be true. Honestly, being where I was, and so close to work, I should have suspected something then. But when you're looking for something urgently, sometimes you get carried away and don't notice the details. Alarmingly, the street the building stood on seemed strange, not empty, but somehow lifeless. The shops were closed. There were no people. There was no noise. There was darkness all around. It looked like a neighborhood that no one uses anymore. And yet, there was a woman from the real estate agent waiting for me at the entrance. I wasn't mistaken, but from the first second I noticed that she was nervous. And she wasn't nervous, like a shy or rushed girl, but restless, not fidgety. He stopped looking inside the building, and simultaneously kept turning toward the street, as if he didn't want to stay in the same place. I was left alone, but I didn't want to be inside either. She quickly took my hand and said, "Let's go. It's on the 5th floor." I tried to joke to lighten the mood, but she didn't get it, didn't even understand. She smiled. All she said was something like, "Listen, I'll show you right now, because I have other meetings right away." And so we entered the building. The lobby was completely dark. Only a faint yellowish light flickered. The light came from an old light bulb. The walls were damp, and although the sign said it had recently been renovated, it was obvious that it only concerned this apartment. The building looked abandoned. There was no sound, no television, no voices, no footsteps, nothing. We took the stairs because she said she didn't trust the elevator. But when we got by the 5th floor, I was sweating like I'd been running. She showed me the apartment in less than 3 minutes. And I'm not exaggerating. He opened the door for me, pointed to the kitchen, briefly showed the bathroom, and when I was about to ask him about the contract, she interrupted him, saying, "Another interested person will be arriving soon. If he likes me, he can text me today. But he has to..." And then he said something that struck me as very strange. He repeated several times that please leave the building door open. Don't close it so I don't have to go down. She moved on to the next person, but the tone of her voice said that she just wanted me to leave, not that I should leave. I wanted to go down. She said she was staying there, and when the restaurant closed, I seriously considered leaving the elevator. I was really tired and wanted to check if it worked. I hadn't planned on renting it, climbing up 5 floors every day and climbing them. As I was leaving, he kept repeating this. I wasn't going to stop at any floor. I was going to go straight down, and that's when I felt a little weird, like he was giving me instructions to avoid bumping into people. I got into the elevator, and the door didn't close properly. There was about an inch of space left, through which you could see the wall on the floor below. The elevator was shaking inside, as if the structure had loosened, and it was one of those elevators that reacts slowly to external stimuli. You press the button. It starts to descend. The descent is incredibly slow. Between the 4th and 3rd floors, I heard someone press a button from below. The elevator stopped. The door opened, and a woman appeared in the frame, standing with her back to the door, about 3 meters away. An elevator. The hallway was very dim, but I could still make out its silhouette. She had long, completely gray hair that fell as if wet, very heavy. Her arms were slightly spread out to the sides, like when you greet someone. Nothing moved. It seemed like nothing had happened. A statue that wasn't breathing, or at least it seemed that way. I said, "Good evening," but I don't know. It didn't move. I pressed the button to close it, but it happened slowly. It felt like 20 seconds passed, and it didn't close. Obviously, for a shorter period. Through the crack, I could see her silhouette, exactly the same, not having moved a millimeter. The elevator continued descending, and on the 2nd floor, the bell rang again, signaling that someone had called it. Then it stopped again. It opened. There she was again, in the same position, at the same angle, at the same distance. If I hadn't seen us descending, if the elevator door hadn't remained slightly ajar, I would have sworn we were on the same floor. But that wasn't true. This time, her body was turning. It was just a slight movement, as if she wanted to turn towards me. The movement was barely noticeable, but I noticed it. It was enough for her to notice that she had moved. She couldn't have gone down to that floor so quickly, because the staircase, not without noise, prevents access to the elevator. I said nothing, or sighed, simply began pressing the button to close it. I didn't want to do it. I didn't understand why she thought that, but I had the feeling she heard me, or thought I wanted to get closer. It would be dangerous if he heard me. The door took a long time to open. The woman was still standing there, leaning forward. Half her body barely turned towards me. Finally, the door closed, and the elevator continued descending. I thought about going straight down to the first floor, but no. First, the doorbell rang again. Someone was ringing from the first floor. When the door opened, I saw nothing, literally nothing. This floor was complete darkness. There was no light, no point of reference, no reflection. It was a black square, emptiness, and suddenly I heard something. Footsteps, not fast, but very slow, as if someone was walking. They were coming from the end of the corridor, that I couldn't see. Every step was audible, closer. I tried to close the door, but the elevator didn't respond. I pressed it, and he didn't do anything, as if frozen in place, and the footsteps continued to slowly, inexorably approach, without stopping. I was already breathing heavily, despite myself. My back was all wet. When I heard the footsteps, they were standing near the elevator, and suddenly, the door finally closed. Having reached the first floor, I stepped out without looking back. I ran. I don't even know if the elevator doors had time to fully open. Before I had already run out into the street. Some guy was knocking at the entrance to the building, as confused as I was. Another young man was standing next to him, and because of the way he was dressed, pardon the expression, for a second I thought he was going to attack him. But no, it turns out it was a neighbor. He told her not to sign anything, that it wasn't the best place. No one lived there. No one could live there. I'd been living there for a long time. The guy who, like me, was clearly going to see the apartment, heard about it, but he came in anyway. Probably thinking I was crazy or exaggerating. 10 minutes ago, I would have thought the same thing. I wanted to stop him, but I couldn't. Words. My legs gave way, and I couldn't think of how to explain it. I left and immediately went to look for a taxi, but there wasn't one. I had to call from there. Another street. Oh no, I don't know what happened to him, and neither do I. I know what I saw. Sometimes I feel like that moment was a dream for the entire visit, as if I saw nothing. It would be completely real, but I'm still looking for an apartment in this area. Walking to work would be a dream, but I promise I'll see another opportunity like that. The advertising is too cheap to be true. Now I'm definitely not going to see that movie. Second story. The Obsessed Girl. Hello dear community members. This happened about 25 years ago, when I was a child, and lived in a quiet neighborhood in the city of Leon, Guanajuato province. It was one of those neighborhoods where there were hardly any cars yet, and where you could play football or hide and seek in the street, and no one would say anything, especially on the street behind mine, the last one in the neighborhood, so far from everything that it was still dirty. From behind, my parents could see me from the window, and as long as we didn't stray too far from the neighborhood, there were no problems. We got together almost every afternoon, the same two neighbors across the street, my cousins the Shoji, who lived a few houses away, and me. Sometimes other kids would join us, but this, and this especially, was just us, the usual group. I remember we played longer than usual. It was already getting dark, and the street lights were on. The neighborhood wasn't very nice, so everything looked pretty dreary. At the end of that street, there was a vacant lot, an uninhabited area. There were no more houses there, just dirt, dry bushes, and a path leading to the main road. We were curious, but they wouldn't let us in yet. They said it was dangerous, so we always played on the opposite side. And yet that evening, we were a little more near that field, because we started looking for the ball that had rolled away from us. I bent down to pick it up when I saw someone walking down the street. It was a girl I'd never seen in this neighborhood before. The strange thing was that, as soon as he saw us, he hid behind a car, as if he was afraid to come closer. We stood motionless. One of my cousins that was said, "She must have lost her way." The other one said we set it up, but I was a little worried, because it looked so tiny, like we were a little older than us, but it felt very strange to be outside at that time of day. I remember asking him if he was okay, and then the pole appeared behind him, and from that moment on I knew something was wrong. It was pretty obvious. Look, I wasn't the smartest kid, but I could tell her clothes weren't normal. She was wearing a simple dress, but it was an old uniform, like a school uniform that almost no one wore anymore. He didn't have a backpack or a sweater or anything like that. That indicated that she came from next door. Her shoes were too big and clean, but her dress looked worn out, like it had been waiting for a long time. I don't know if I remember it, because at the time, all the girls were wearing completely different clothes, and I'll never forget that. The second thing we noticed was the expression on her face, not because she looked offended or anything, but because she wasn't doing anything. She had this impassive expression. She didn't smile. She didn't look scared. Nothing. She just looked at us, and when he spoke, fear filled the community. And she didn't have a child's voice. It was a voice that was very hard to describe. She looked very thin, but at the same time mature, as if she were trying to speak like a child, and it didn't work. It was as if the voice came from the very depths of her soul, from a place that didn't correspond to the body that was in front of us. And he asked us, "Where is the way?" Just like that, without any context, without warning, without explaining that she was lost. "Where is the way?" I pointed to the uninhabited land, and I told him that if he continued walking straight, he would find it. He didn't ask any more questions, didn't thank us, didn't. He didn't say anything. He just walked slowly in that direction, as if he didn't know anything. Move your feet smoothly, as if copying someone else's gait. We watched her progress until she disappeared behind the dry trees of the area. We went inside, and I remember my parents asking me, when we got home, why I was so pale. I told them what we'd seen, and they said it was probably a local girl who just arrived, and that was the end of it. At least for that night, because the worst would come later. The next day, very early, the neighbors started talking and gossiping. They said a little girl had run away from home. They said she'd run away from the church, which was a few blocks away, and they'd kept her there because she was possessed. They'd brought her from the village and kept her safe there. They were expecting her parents to arrive from Rome to look into her case, and this wasn't her first attempt to escape. Every neighbor had their own version of events. The details varied, but they all agreed that there was a girl in that church, and that something very strange was going on. She said she'd heard screams outside. When I heard that, I got scared. I felt a knot in my stomach, because I didn't immediately understand the connection, but gradually it dawned on me. The girl we saw last night was heading toward the road. It seemed she was leaving the neighborhood, as if she was trying to get as far away from the church as possible. I remember that for a long time after that. We stopped playing in that part of the street, neither we nor the other children. And not because our parents didn't forbid it, but because everyone. Every night, almost at the same time, just before dark, screams were heard. But these were not ordinary screams. They were very strange. They were like the screams of a little girl, but at the same time, it was as if the voice of an elderly person changed in the middle of the screams. There were nights when her voice sounded like the voice of an old woman. Other nights, her voice came as if it was coming from far away, from inside a room, a huge emptiness. And later, when we talked about it, everyone remembered us differently. My cousins Abdullah said they heard the girl act as if she was walking right next to them, like she was strolling between the houses. Other neighbors said the sound seemed to come from far away, even in deserted areas. One woman swore she heard it, upstairs, like an echo on the rooftops. I don't know. All I know is that we all heard it, and we all stopped playing outside for a few months. After a while, the screams stopped. We stopped talking about it, and forgot about it. The story went something like this. One of those neighborhood gossips that adults get tired of repeating, and children try to forget. But I still remember the way that girl we saw that night walked, the escape, and in that voice that had nothing to do with what it looked like. Third story. Apartment 313. Hello everyone. This happened to me when I was living in Guadalajara in 2015. I was in my early 20s, and I worked as a manager at a coffee shop downtown. Actually, it wasn't just a coffee shop. It was more than that. It was a small bakery that sold really good coffee. It was one of those stone oven bakeries, very traditional. My shift started at 5 a.m., right when we turned on the ovens. So I had to leave. I left the apartment at 4 a.m. every day. I lived in an old building, Not very big, like the ones they built in the 70s. It looked nice from the outside, but inside, you started to notice how old it was. The hallways echoed, the light bulbs kept burning out, and there were also doors that didn't close well, so you had to slam them, and things like that. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, and right across from mine was apartment number 313. Although I always thought that was strange, because that floor had numbers 301 and 302. I asked about it once, and they told me that this numbering had existed since the building was built, but I never understood why. What? Because only that floor had such a jump, as if the 313th floor belonged to someone else, another building. The thing is, every morning when I left for work, the same thing happened. I was closing the door, and at that very moment, the door of building number 313 opened. Just a crack, a few centimeters, just enough to notice. It opened, and that was it. The first thing I noticed was a blue apron, one of those kitchen aprons. Then I heard the wrinkled but strong hand of an elderly woman resting on the edge of the door, and then her voice. "Good morning, young man. Work will start soon." Always the same phrase. 4 o'clock. I said yes, I'll leave earlier, because I need to get there. 2, 5. She felt it, although she almost never managed to see it fully, only the silhouette of his head moving outside the door, and then he would tell me the same thing. "I don't sleep anymore. If you want, come in for coffee." Just a little snack to go. But it never opened wider. It never showed itself in all its glory. I never managed to see it, inside. Above that crack, darkness, the silhouette of a head, a small piece of a blue apron, and the smell of soap. A strong smell, like laundry, freshly washed, but mixed with something old, as if this smell had been locked in a room, locked for a long time. He always thanked her, and said no, that she was in a great hurry, and thought it was an elderly woman, who lived alone, and did not sleep. To be honest, I felt sorry for him, but I still didn't have the coffee. I didn't feel comfortable entering an apartment that was never fully open. This went on for several months, until that early morning hour stopped being routine. You sleep in a few times a week. Everything was exactly the same, until one night it started raining, and it got colder than usual. I went out to the store, and for some reason, looked at the door of number 313. It didn't open. Nothing happened, but I don't know what I felt. Something about it struck me as strange, and maybe I even felt a little relief that no one was there at that moment. If only my body had tensed on its own, without my conscious awareness. But just as I was about to go down the stairs, he heard a sharp knock from inside number 313. A sharp, loud, very distinct knock, like as if something very heavy had fallen. I ran back, went to the door and asked, "Madam, are you all right?" Silence. I started knocking on the door, and felt everything inside freeze, as if nothing would happen. Not just the usual night silence, but as if nothing was happening inside, absolutely nothing, and it was very strange, because there should have been some kind of reaction to the blow. I went downstairs, and immediately went to the doorman, who was sleeping in a chair by the entrance. I said that I thought it was the woman from house 313. Something happened to him. He barely opened his eyes and asked me irritably, "Which woman exactly?" "Well, the one from house 313. The one who lives across the street from me," I said. The doorman was stunned. He looked at her as if I had said something stupid. "Nobody lives there." I laughed a little, thinking that he did not understand me. I explained that they opened for me every morning to say goodbye. Coffee, an apron, the woman who took the coffee, and then his expression changed. He stood up abruptly and said to me, "Come with me. I'm going to show you something now, but don't touch anything." We went upstairs. He pulled out a huge ring of keys and looked for a rusty key. When I opened door 303, he went in first, and the smell hit me immediately. It wasn't the smell of soap or clean linen, but the smell of stale dust, years of old damp, something stored too long. The apartment was a complete wreck. The walls peeling, damp stains. The cabinets were doorless. The kitchen was a rusty wreck. The window was broken and covered in thick cobwebs, the kind that look like it hasn't been looked after for months, or even years, even decades. There was no furniture, no chairs, no sign of what could have caused it. I heard a noise. I told the doorman it was impossible, that I almost saw that woman. I read in the diary that we talked, that he offered me coffee, and that I just heard a bang, a loud one. I swear the keeper crossed himself and grabbed my arm. "We don't belong here," he told me. and you shouldn't see this." I insisted. I told him I didn't understand anything, that if he knew something he should tell me, but he didn't say anything while we were there. We left. He closed the door properly, and that was the end of it. As we were going down the stairs, I turned to look at him, and he said, "You're not the first." He stopped during a break and told me. He said that many years ago, in 2007, I lived in the same apartment building with a doctor, a young doctor with an unusual work schedule, who sometimes left the house early in the morning, around 4 o'clock, just like me, and she too heard a voice from there, not a woman's, but an older man's, the man greeting her from behind the door of number 313, without opening it even a crack. She always said the same thing to her. "Good morning, miss. I don't sleep anymore, you understand." And I also offered her coffee to go. When the doctor complained about this, they called maintenance and opened number 313 to make sure there was no one there. Everything was exactly the same as it had been then. Abandoned, in ruins. The building, without signs that someone was hiding there. They even thought the doctor was hallucinating, that it was due to lack of sleep, or perhaps she was taking some kind of medication to cope with shift work. She left after a few weeks, and never again. He explained the reason. He simply left the keys and moved out, leaving a few things behind. The doorman asked me not to look at that door anymore when I left, and not to answer if I heard anything, and I wouldn't accept anything. No coffee, no conversation, nothing. I stopped leaving the house early in the morning. I changed my schedule. A few months later I left Guadalajara. I left that building. I can't say I spent the rest of my time there in fear, because I didn't feel it during the day. But believe me, I no longer intended to leave early, knowing that my door would open at 4 a.m. and I could put on a show. Across the street, a blue apron peeked out, emanating a strong soapy smell. An abandoned apartment. I never found out who lived there. I really lived in that section, and now it's just a memory, a very clear memory, especially that phrase, which I still hear. I don't sleep anymore. Fourth story. Lost Souls on the Road to Matehuala. This story is not mine, but I've heard it so many times since childhood that I feel like I've been there too. It's about my uncle. May he rest in peace. He worked as a truck driver for many years. I drove the highway between Matehuala and Saltillo several times a month for many years. And although my uncle was never one to believe in strange things, what happened there left an indelible mark on him for life. I'm told that he returned to church after many years. This road always seemed peaceful to him, especially compared to others. It made him nervous, a feeling of insecurity, until one night he started. I noticed something as I passed by, and the thing is, several times, in the same place, in a deserted area, where there are no houses, no stores, no ranches, nothing around. I saw a woman standing on the side of the road, stopped in the same spot, giving the same sign, the thumbs up. Up there he was hitchhiking. My uncle never gave rides to anyone. He didn't like it. He said it was dangerous, that he didn't like it. He never knew who he was getting involved with, but he swore the woman didn't seem aggressive, or weird, or anything like that. In fact, he looked quite sad, like he wasn't from around here. For example, he barely knew where she was. He'd seen her like this for months. She was always there. And at night, at the hour he passed, he'd always stand with his hand out, his finger raised, as if waiting for his truck, or some good Samaritan, to give him a ride. And one night, for reasons unknown, my uncle decided to stop. He felt more sorry for her than usual. Maybe he wanted to help. He told me he'd be home refreshed that evening. The delivery was on schedule. He didn't want to sleep. He had some old music playing that he liked, and something inside him said, "Poor lady, alone again." And he stopped. As soon as he stopped, he regretted it, but it was too late. It was late, and the woman didn't react at all to the brakes. She didn't come closer, didn't lower her hand. She didn't move an inch. She kept her hand outstretched, just like when he approached from afar, as if she didn't see him. My uncle got out of the truck to talk to her, and tell her that if she wanted, he could give her a ride somewhere, take her to the next town. He didn't do it confidently, but cautiously, of course. But he tried to speak kindly, and it was there, getting out of the truck, that the first strange thing happened. His own shadow, my uncle's shadow, stretched along the road, a very long shadow, as if it were his own. The middle part of the body, 3 or 4 meters, as if the headlights of the truck were lying on the floor. She stretched her shadow forward. My uncle paused for a second to look at it. He tried to understand why it was presented that way, but then he noticed something else. The woman had no shadow, nothing. She didn't even cast a line on the asphalt, and unfortunately, He had already walked far enough, finding himself a few steps away from her, almost in front of her. He looked in front of her, and that's when the worst happened. He realized the woman was moving her mouth, quickly, as if she were speaking very, very quickly, without looking at him, her gaze absorbed. The road seemed to be waiting for something, but he heard nothing, nothing. As if her voice sounded unnatural, as if she were speaking underwater, or as if she were talking in a room, and he was right next to her. Another completely different incident. My uncle said he clearly saw his jaw move. The way she spoke words, moved her neck, chin, and lips, but he didn't hear a single sound. He felt something he'd never felt before. He ran to the truck, jumped in, and drove away without looking back, his heart pounding with fear of what he might see. The rear-view mirrors grew larger, and the fear that the passenger door would open only intensified. He tore forward, not slowing down for a while. He didn't want to think about the kilometers. He didn't want to explain anything, just drive. He drove as far as he could. When he finally reached Matehuala, he stopped at a gas station, and that was the end of it. For a moment the adrenaline subsided a little, and although she tried to convince herself that she'd imagined it all, something didn't add up. What finally broke him was what he discovered later. On the way back, when they passed each other, it happened on the way back that same day. On that same stretch, he focused his gaze intently on the very spot where he always saw the woman early in the morning. But this time, he looked at the other side of the road, and at that moment, his heart sank. There were two of those white metal crosses they put up when someone dies in an accident, old and rusty, as if they had been there for years. He didn't like making up stories, so he decided to ask other truck drivers and police officers in the area if they knew of any accidents in the area, but no one knew anything. I didn't tell her anything specific. My uncle saw the woman 2 more times, always early in the morning, always in the same pose, always without a shadow, but she never stopped again, and he slowed down and turned away as he passed her. And even though he's no longer with us to tell it again, I want his story to live on for a long time. And I have to say, I've never driven on this stretch of road before. We drove at night. Have a good rest, and good night everyone.